What happens when a decorated homeless veteran stands trial for trespassing, only to reveal in court that the land he's accused of entering actually belongs to him? How does a man who's lost everything find the courage to challenge a powerful corporation determined to silence him? As Daniel Cooper fights, not just for his dignity, but for the truth, secrets emerge that could change everything. Could his modest piece of land be hiding something worth millions? And what lengths will Harlan and company go to protect their scheme? In a battle for justice, survival, and redemption, will one man's resilience be enough to expose corruption and reclaim what's rightfully his? The answers may surprise you. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. If you like stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another special story for you. Jessica Carteres. I had started with the same steady rhythm she always loved about Westlake Memorial Hospital, arriving at dawn with a cup of steaming coffee. She greeted the security guards and flashed them her easy smile. Though she was actually the hospital's medical director, Jessica preferred blending in by wearing standard scrubs. She believed in leading from the front, not an office. Staff members found her down-to-earth nature refreshing, but very few of them realized the true extent of her authority. In one of the bustling wards, Dr. Alan Peterson stormed in, apparently agitated. He was known as a brilliant surgeon with immaculate success rates, but his arrogance overshadowed his talent. His impatience with nurses and junior staff often led to murmured complaints. However, the hospital's leadership had always been reluctant to challenge him because of his stellar outcomes. That morning, he spotted Jessica checking on a patient's vitals. She appeared to him like just another nurse stepping out of line. "Get away from this bed right now," Dr. Peterson thundered. Pointing at Jessica, he demanded to know why she was examining a post-op patient without his express permission. The surrounding staff froze, stunned by the harsh tone. Jessica looked up calmly, but felt her pulse quicken at the public scolding. She was used to tense situations, yet the sting of such blatant disrespect still surprised her. "Doctor, I was assisting," Jessica said, her voice steady. She tried to keep her composure, though annoyance flared inside. Having contributed to patient care countless times, she'd rarely been spoken to so rudely. The staff in the room watched wide-eyed, some stepping back in discomfort. Dr. Peterson cut her off sharply. "Assisting? Who exactly told you to do that? You're out of your depth. Nurses like you are supposed to follow instructions, not invent them." His voice echoed, and the tension clung to every observer. Jessica suppressed a wave of anger. The words, "nurses like you," echoed in her mind, heavy with a racial undercurrent she knew all too well. Still, she kept her face composed. Reacting explosively would only worsen the moment. Before Jessica could respond, Mr. William Harris, one of the senior administrators, stepped into the room. His expression shifted to stern disapproval as he took in the scenario. Dr. Peterson, noticing Harris, paused. The tension was palpable. Staff members and patients alike glanced nervously between the surgeon and the administrator. Harris calmly asked Dr. Peterson to speak outside, effectively defusing the confrontation for the moment. Once the commotion had subsided, Jessica quietly checked the patient's chart again. Underneath her professionalism, annoyance pulsed. She had believed in a team-based approach, one where every nurse, doctor, and assistant contributed their skills for the patient's benefit. Dr. Peterson's attitude undermined that vision, and part of Jessica wanted to reveal her true title right then and there. But she decided against it. She had a strategy: to earn respect through genuine effort and skill, not by flaunting her authority. In the corridor, she heard raised voices. Dr. Peterson and Harris were talking in low, intense tones, though Jessica couldn't discern the specific words. The hard edge in Peterson's voice suggested he wasn't interested in an apology. She returned to her duties, making her rounds and helping where she could. Throughout the day, rumors flew about the clash. Some staff quietly applauded Jessica's grace, while others exchanged worried glances. Dr. Peterson's temper was infamous, and the board typically turned a blind eye to his outbursts, given his prestige. Yet Jessica felt the weight of what had happened. She could handle a dressing down, but she couldn't tolerate the underlying disrespect or the potential risk to patient care. Later, as Jessica walked past the administrative offices, Harris beckoned her inside. His look held both concern and curiosity. "You all right?" he asked gently. Jessica nodded, though her jaw tightened. "I'm fine," she replied, determined to handle this discreetly. Though Dr. Peterson's behavior was unacceptable, Jessica's priority was ensuring the hospital functioned smoothly. She intended to continue working as she always did, giving patients her full attention and quietly championing respect among the staff. But she had a strong feeling that this clash marked only the beginning of a battle that would inevitably reveal her true role and challenge Dr. Peterson's power in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The day after the confrontation, tension lingered like a storm cloud over Westlake Memorial. Jessica conducted her usual early morning rounds, trying to restore the normal calm. She stopped by the ICU to check charts and greet the night shift nurses, noticing uneasy whispers whenever she passed. The rumor mill clearly hadn't stopped churning overnight. Meanwhile, Dr. Peterson seemed set on carrying on as if nothing had happened. Jessica spotted him speaking to a group of junior doctors in a hallway. He delivered instructions in an even tone, but there was an unmistakable stiffness in his posture. He was likely aware that news of his public humiliation attempt had already spread. Some staff members gave Jessica encouraging nods or anxious glances, uncertain if another outburst was looming. Mid-morning, Jessica made her way to a break room where she overheard two nurses, Maria and Andrew, discussing her. "I heard she's actually got advanced qualifications, but nobody really knows what her exact title is," Maria said. Andrew shrugged, adding, "All I know is she handled Dr. Peterson's blow-up like a pro." Jessica smiled inwardly, touched by their support. She chose not to reveal herself, stepping away quietly so they wouldn't feel embarrassed. Shortly after, Jessica slipped into her office, an unassuming space with minimal decor. She rarely used this room for anything but paperwork and private meetings. Sitting down, she began reviewing staff evaluations. A disturbing pattern emerged: repeated complaints about Dr. Peterson's behavior, notably from nurses who felt belittled or even verbally attacked. Yet each note was followed by a hesitant remark about his excellent surgical results. Jessica shook her head. Skill didn't excuse bullying or, worse, potential discrimination. Halfway through the stack of evaluations, her phone buzzed. Mr. Harris was on the line, requesting her presence in the administrative conference room. Jessica hurried upstairs to find Harris and two board members seated around a long, polished table. Their expressions told her the conversation would be about Dr. Peterson. "We've gotten word of yesterday's incident," said one board member. "This can't continue, Jessica. We need your perspective." Jessica explained what had occurred. Peterson's berating her as she checked a patient's vitals, his inflammatory tone, and the racial undertone in his words that left her stunned. She didn't dramatize. She simply laid out the facts. Harris leaned forward, brow furrowed. There are multiple complaints against him, but his track record as a surgeon is nearly flawless. The board is reluctant to confront him, worried about losing someone with such a high success rate. Jessica glanced at the table. Part of her knew that exact detail was why Peterson had gotten away with such conduct for so long. She also realized it would be an uphill battle changing the hospital's stance. When the meeting ended, she left feeling uncertain. The board knew the truth, but their hesitation to intervene was palpable. Jessica resolved to keep focusing on patient care while quietly gathering more information. If Dr. Peterson pushed further, she'd be ready. That afternoon, Jessica entered the operating suite to observe a high-risk cardiac procedure, making sure the team had everything they needed. She stood off to the side, not wanting to provoke Peterson if he happened to look over and notice her. But once the surgery concluded, he stormed out, ignoring her presence completely. The nurses around him looked relieved the procedure had gone well, but also uneasy at the tension that crackled whenever the two were near. Later, Jessica found Maria waiting by the nurse's station. The young nurse wrung her hands nervously. Dr. Carter. She stopped, then corrected herself. Jessica, is it true you're actually in charge around here? Jessica gave a mild smile. I'm the medical director, but I like to work closely with the team. Titles matter less than good patient outcomes. Maria nodded, admiration clear in her eyes. I just want you to know a lot of us support you. He's been difficult for ages, but nobody's ever challenged him publicly. Jessica thanked her. That exchange underscored the deeper problem, fear. Staff dreaded Peterson's temper and the possibility of professional retaliation. Yet there was also a growing sense that, with Jessica, they finally had someone on their side. She decided it was time to discreetly align with those who wanted a safer, more respectful workplace. If Dr. Peterson refused to change, the board would have no choice but to confront him. As evening approached, Jessica once again found herself double-checking patient charts. She remembered the humiliating moment when Peterson had shouted at her. The sting hadn't fully faded, but she now saw it as a catalyst. If the hospital's culture was to be reformed, she would need the entire staff's backing. The seeds of change were planted, but she braced herself for a battle. She had no illusions that Dr. Peterson would quietly accept a challenge to his power. 2 days later, rumors of a blow-up in the ICU ricocheted through the halls. Staff members whispered that Dr. Peterson had berated a scrub nurse during a critical procedure. The nurse, shaken and nearly in tears, had tried to brush off the incident, but the tension only grew. By the time Jessica heard about it, people were already describing it as another alarming show of disrespect. Trying to diffuse the negativity, Jessica walked over to the ICU for a first-hand update. Sure enough, the nurse in question was there, tidying up supplies with trembling hands. Jessica approached quietly. "Are you all right?" she asked. The nurse nodded jerkily, her eyes betraying lingering fear. I just don't want to lose my job," she murmured. Jessica felt her heart clench. This environment of intimidation wasn't merely a personality quirk. It was a serious workplace issue. On her way out, Jessica spotted Dr. Peterson in the corridor, deep in conversation with another physician. Their voices were low, but the glances they cast her way suggested they weren't discussing patient outcomes. Jessica continued walking, refusing to show any sign of intimidation. Still, the hairs on the back of her neck prickled. She could sense his hostility, like a storm cloud about to burst. Later that morning, Mr. Harris called an impromptu staff meeting in a large conference room. Jessica stood near the back, arms folded, observing as the room filled with a mix of nurses, doctors, and administrative personnel. Once everyone was settled, Harris started by addressing the multiple complaints about negativity in the workplace. He referenced concerns about harsh attitudes and stressed the hospital's policy of mutual respect. Dr. Peterson, standing by the window, looked unimpressed. When Harris opened the floor for questions or comments, Peterson cleared his throat loudly. "I'd like to know," he said in a clipped voice, "when exactly we started prioritizing people's fragile feelings over critical patient care." A wave of discomfort rippled through the room. Jessica watched quietly, noticing the uneasy shifting of those too afraid to respond. Harris remained poised. "We prioritize both," he said. "Respect among colleagues and patient outcomes go hand in hand." Peterson rolled his eyes before fixing his gaze on Jessica, who still stayed silent. She refused to be baited in front of everyone. The tension hung heavy as Harris quickly wrapped up the meeting, not wanting it to devolve into open conflict. In the following days, Dr. Peterson's hostility became bolder. At times, he'd make snide remarks whenever he encountered Jessica on the wards, questioning her decisions or undermining her instructions in front of junior staff. She noticed the anxious looks from others, who clearly expected her to snap back or reveal her authority. Yet Jessica understood the importance of strategy. A hasty confrontation could backfire and jeopardize not only her standing, but also the morale she was trying to protect. With each provocation, Jessica remained calm, focusing on patient care and listening closely to staff grievances. She began collecting statements from nurses, technicians, and even a few doctors who quietly admitted that Peterson's arrogance impaired team efficiency. Late at night in her modest office, she compiled these first-hand accounts and documented incidents of unprofessional behavior. She knew evidence would be crucial if the board finally decided to move against him. But the battle escalated further when Jessica received an anonymous email one morning. It contained malicious rumors, clearly from Peterson or someone loyal to him, hinting that she was merely posing as a director and that she lacked the qualifications to handle the role. The note also included veiled jabs about her race, insinuating that the hospital's push for diversity had led to an unfit individual in a senior position. Jessica felt anger course through her, but she also felt sadness. Bigotry was creeping into what should have been a purely professional dispute. She handed the email over to Mr. Harris. His face clouded with anger as he read it. "This is unacceptable," he said. "We can't ignore it. We'll have an IT team trace the source." Jessica thanked him, though she doubted Peterson would have been careless enough to leave a direct trail. That evening, Jessica silently toured the halls, checking on patient after patient. She listened to families' anxieties, reassured them where she could, and coordinated any necessary tests. In each interaction, she affirmed her reasons for taking on this role: serving others, healing the sick, and uplifting the staff. Dr. Peterson's hostility was a distraction from her true calling, and she vowed not to let it consume her. Yet, as midnight approached and the corridors grew dim, Jessica felt a gnawing concern that the situation with Peterson was reaching a boiling point. She sensed he wouldn't relent. The question was, how much damage would he cause before the hospital finally put a stop to it? Early the next morning, Jessica arrived at her office to find Mr. Harris waiting, eyes filled with urgency. He explained that the hospital board had scheduled an emergency session, prompted by the accumulating complaints and the suspicious email aimed at Jessica. She felt a slight tremor of relief. Maybe this time, the board would stop turning a blind eye. At the board meeting, Jessica found herself seated opposite Dr. Peterson for the first time. The atmosphere crackled with unspoken accusations. Mr. Jenkins, the board chair, began by summarizing the hospital's official stance on professional conduct, then acknowledged the growing discontent among staff. He glanced between Jessica and Peterson. "We can't ignore the tensions any longer," Jenkins said gravely. Dr. Peterson, looking insulted, spoke up first. He dismissed the complaints as overblown sensitivities, arguing that his track record gave him the right to demand high standards. He claimed that certain staff members, incapable of handling pressure, were hiding behind personal grievances. Jessica listened calmly, though her blood simmered at his dismissive tone. When it was her turn, Jessica outlined specific incidents. She described the outbursts in the ICU, the humiliations in front of patients, and the harassing emails referencing her background. She produced statements from nurses and junior doctors. She avoided getting personal, sticking to facts. The board members exchanged uneasy looks. Mr. Jenkins sighed, clearly torn between Peterson's professional success and Jessica's credible evidence. "We will conduct a thorough review," he concluded. "In the meantime, Dr. Peterson, you are to maintain decorum. And Jessica, we expect you to report any further breaches immediately." It wasn't the sweeping rebuke she'd hoped for, but it was a start. Over the next few days, a tense calm settled over Westlake Memorial. Peterson seemed to rein himself in, at least publicly. But Jessica sensed he was brewing another strategy. Someone like him wouldn't simply concede. She pressed on with her duties, upgrading patient care protocols and offering staff additional training sessions. With her blend of empathy and authority, Jessica won further support, especially from nurses who felt seen and valued for the first time in years. Then, the unthinkable happened. A second email began circulating, this time hospital-wide, accusing Jessica of interfering in critical surgeries and claiming that her presence created liabilities. This message cited patient charts, redacted but still identifiable, implying Jessica had stepped into roles beyond her qualifications. The allegations were written in cold, clinical language, designed to rattle trust in her leadership. Jessica was in the middle of updating ICU policies when Maria rushed to her with a printout. "Everyone's reading this," Maria whispered, eyes anxious. Jessica scanned the contents, fury and hurt surging through her. She knew the claims were twisted or outright false, but the damage was done. Staff were worried, and her credibility was under assault. She met with Mr. Harris and their legal advisor immediately. "This is a blatant violation of privacy," Jessica pointed out. "Peterson must be behind it, or at least someone close to him." Harris agreed, pointing out that the timing seemed orchestrated to undermine her just as the board's review was ramping up. They decided to issue a statement, defending Jessica's record and reassuring the staff that no patient had been harmed by any so-called interference. The statement helped somewhat, but suspicion lingered. Some employees who had once been supportive avoided Jessica's gaze in the hallways, uncertain whether there might be truth in the claims. She fought a growing sense of isolation, leaning on her closest allies, Maria, Andrew, and a handful of others, who reassured her that most people recognized a smear campaign when they saw one. In the midst of the turmoil, Jessica found a silver lining. Multiple nurses and even a few doctors submitted voluntary testimonials praising her active, hands-on approach. They described her stepping in during emergencies, taking swift action that saved lives or prevented complications. They thanked her for accessible leadership. When these letters reached the board, Mr. Jenkins acknowledged them and arranged another special session to discuss the latest accusations. At that session, Jessica laid out a timeline disproving the claims. She meticulously showed where her involvement was warranted by urgent patient needs. She even demonstrated improved recovery rates in cases she had overseen. Her evidence was compelling enough that the board declared they would intensify the investigation, this time focusing on who had leaked sensitive medical information. Dr. Peterson sat across the table, silent but smoldering. Jessica felt the tension in his glare. She could almost read his thoughts. He was determined not to lose, no matter the cost. Once the meeting adjourned, she headed back to her office, shoulders stiff with stress. She knew the final showdown was nearing. Either Peterson's toxic tactics would be exposed to the point where he'd have no choice but to resign, or the board would cower again under the weight of his prestige. Jessica vowed she wouldn't give up, not when the well-being of so many patients and staff was at stake. A week passed with the tension at Westlake Memorial reaching a breaking point. Jessica soldiered on, reviewing patient cases, speaking at staff briefings, and keeping a watchful eye on any sign of further sabotage. Word came that the IT department was close to identifying the source of the leaked patient records. Jessica privately hoped they would confirm what everyone suspected, Dr. and other members already seated with somber expressions. Dr. Peterson arrived shortly after, flanked by an attorney. Jessica's pulse raced. She sensed this would be the pivotal moment. "Thank you for coming," Mr. Jenkins began, voice tense. "We have concluded our investigation into the unauthorized release of patient information and the related defamation claims." He turned to Dr. Peterson. "Our IT department traced the email transmissions to an account linked to you." A hushed gasp filled the room. Dr. Peterson bristled. "That's impossible," he insisted. "I never authorized such an email. Someone's framing me." His attorney placed a hand on his arm, but Peterson shook it off. Jessica watched quietly, heart pounding. Mr. Jenkins lifted a folder. "These documents confirm the emails originated from your login credentials. Regardless of your intentions, the evidence is undeniable." He paused, scanning the faces around the table. "We must act." Patient privacy was jeopardized. So was hospital morale. In that moment, Dr. Peterson's facade cracked. His well-rehearsed arrogance slipped into desperation as he tried to shift blame onto unknown hackers or enemies who wanted him gone. The board members, unimpressed, remained resolute. After a brief, heated exchange between Peterson's attorney and the hospital's legal counsel, Mr. Jenkins announced Peterson's suspension, pending possible termination. Jessica swallowed hard. She'd envisioned a scenario like this, yet seeing it play out felt surreal. Peterson stood abruptly, glaring at her. "This isn't over," he hissed under his breath as he left the room with his attorney. Jessica exhaled, shoulders slumping in a mix of relief and lingering apprehension. For the next few days, the hospital buzzed with talk of Peterson's suspension. Some staff expressed anger at his betrayal. Others, once loyal to him, felt deceived by the leaked emails and were embarrassed for defending him. Jessica noticed a palpable shift. People no longer walked on eggshells. Confidence in her leadership grew, bolstered by how she had weathered the storm. But the aftermath wasn't entirely peaceful. Rumors circulated that Peterson planned a lawsuit against the hospital and Jessica personally, claiming wrongful suspension. A few staff members worried this legal battle would harm Westlake Memorial's reputation. Jessica, steeling herself, declared she was prepared to face any courtroom drama if it meant preserving the hospital's integrity. In the meantime, Jessica dove into ensuring smooth operations. She spearheaded new training sessions that emphasized respectful communication and collaboration. She addressed the staff at a gathering in the main auditorium, openly discussing the challenges they had faced. She reaffirmed that the hospital thrived on unity and compassion. The applause that followed gave her renewed faith in the path she'd chosen. One afternoon, Maria approached Jessica in the ICU with a tearful smile. "Thank you for everything," the young nurse said. "I was scared Dr. Peterson would ruin us. But you helped show that no one is above accountability." Jessica's throat tightened. She reached out and squeezed Maria's hand. "No one should ever feel demeaned. We all deserve respect." At the end of that week, the board reconvened, this time behind closed doors. Jessica was later informed that Dr. Peterson had tendered his resignation in exchange for the hospital not pursuing criminal charges for the data breach. The lawsuit talk was over. The board accepted his resignation. Just like that, the once untouchable surgeon was gone. Though the conflict had been draining, Jessica felt a profound sense of relief and purpose. The staff at Westlake Memorial now looked to her for guidance more than ever, trusting her empathy and skill. She planned to honor that trust by keeping her promise. That Westlake would be a place where patient well-being and staff respect went hand in hand. As she walked down a corridor filled with bustling nurses and doctors, Jessica reflected on the journey. From a public humiliation rooted in racist undertones, she had emerged stronger, forging unity in the face of hostility. Her title was finally out in the open, yet it was her actions that truly mattered. The hospital felt lighter, the team more cohesive, and Jessica felt certain that even though challenges would arise in the future, Westlake Memorial was ready to meet them, together. Westlake Memorial Hospital emerged from a season of conflict with a renewed spirit of collaboration and respect. Dr. Alan Peterson's suspension and eventual resignation put an end to his toxic influence, but the experience left a lasting impact on everyone involved. Staff members who once felt intimidated by his reputation found their voices, recognizing that talent can never justify abuse. In the aftermath, team morale soared as people recognized the power of standing together against manipulation and bigotry. At the center of it all was Jessica Carter. Initially underestimated and publicly humiliated for her background, she revealed her capabilities in the face of adversity. By quietly helping patients, supporting nurses, and building alliances, she proved that real leadership transcends any single title. In fact, her insistence on remaining close to staff, wearing scrubs, and meeting them at their level only strengthened the hospital's cohesion. The journey was grueling, filled with moments of self-doubt, worry for patient safety, and frustration at those who hesitated to challenge Dr. Peterson. Yet with steadfast determination, Jessica refused to let slander and intimidation deter her. Bolstered by her supporters, she championed transparency and upheld the values vital to quality health care. In the end, truth and integrity prevailed. The board fully acknowledged Jessica's leadership, expressing gratitude for her perseverance. Nurses like Maria and leaders like Mr. Harris saw how she put patients first, even when it meant weathering personal attacks. Westlake Memorial continued to thrive, free from the shadow of Peterson's toxic behaviors. Jessica's victory wasn't about besting an arrogant surgeon. It was about safeguarding the hospital's heart, ensuring that compassion, unity, and respect guide every decision. And with that, a new, brighter chapter began for everyone who walked its halls.